The most advanced frameworks of modern corporate strategy rely on the 200-year-old math of a 19th century stockbroker. Managers often operate under a persistent misconception, the belief that simply working harder or increasing operational efficiency will guarantee a sustained profit. David Ricardo was the self-educated outsider who built the first rigorous deductive models to prove why effort alone is not enough to sustain an advantage. Before he was a theorist, Ricardo was a highly successful market speculator on the London Exchange, amassing a fortune that gave his later analytical work a practical financial edge. In 1817, he replaced the discursive moral philosophy of his era with a deductive, model-based science of political economy. To understand how today's top firms achieve sustainable returns, we must decode Ricardo's foundational proofs of heterogeneity and opportunity cost. In 1817, Britain was gripped by a fierce policy debate over the Corn Laws, tariffs designed to restrict grain imports and protect domestic agriculture. The debate centered on a specific question: why were landlords entitled to an income from land that they neither farmed nor improved? This inquiry challenged Adam Smith's established theory of trade, which focused on absolute advantage, the idea that entities gain by exporting what they produce more efficiently than anyone else. But Adam Smith's logic left a gap. If one nation, or one firm, is more efficient at producing absolutely everything, does it still have anything to gain from trade? Answering that question forced Ricardo to build two new mathematical models that still dictate modern corporate boundaries and the durability of profit. Ricardo's first proof is the principle of comparative advantage, illustrated by a trade scenario between England and Portugal involving cloth and wine. Here are the base variables: the labor hours required to produce 1 unit of each good in both countries. Portugal is faster at producing both goods, holding an absolute advantage in both wine and cloth. Common logic suggests Portugal should isolate itself and produce everything internally, as it has no reason to rely on the less efficient England. But the math changes when we look at relative opportunity cost. In Portugal, 1 unit of wine costs about 0.89 units of cloth. In England, that same unit of wine costs 1.2 units of cloth. Wine is cheaper to produce, in terms of cloth foregone, in Portugal, while cloth is relatively cheaper to produce in England. Ricardo proved that if both countries specialize in their relative advantage and then trade, total output rises and both can consume more than they could in isolation. This mathematical rule translates from 19th century nations to the internal resource allocation of modern firms. It explains why a CEO who can perform every task better than their subordinates must still delegate. Their time is a scarce resource, and its opportunity cost is highest when diverted from leadership to tasks others could perform. Because a firm's total value increases when scarce capital and talent are applied to their highest relative use, managers should outsource any activity that can be acquired from the market for less than its internal opportunity cost.
Ricardo's second framework explains the mechanical origin of rent, which allows us to isolate the specific sources of corporate profit today. He envisioned an agricultural economy dependent on land of varying, unequal fertility. To model this, we can divide the economy into 3 plots: high fertility Tier 1, medium Tier 2, and marginal Tier 3 land. As the population grows and demand rises, the market is eventually forced to bring that poor, expensive-to-farm Tier 3 land into cultivation. In a competitive market, the price of grain must rise high enough to cover the production costs of this marginal land, or it won't be farmed at all. This creates a surplus for the superior land. It produces grain at a low cost, but sells it at the high market price set by the marginal land. This surplus is Ricardian rent, a return that exists purely because the underlying resource is heterogeneous. Critically, this profit survives under full competition. It is not a monopoly profit extracted by cheating the market, but a return for owning a superior resource. The rent persists because the superior resource is strictly limited in supply. Competitors cannot simply manufacture more fertile land to drive the price down. Strategic management adopted this logic to form the resource-based view of the firm. Superior land corresponds to modern valuable resources, a proprietary algorithm, a trusted brand, or a team of exceptional engineers. Marginal land represents the baseline competitors who operate with standard capabilities that any rival can buy. We can disaggregate a firm's profit into 4 types of economic rent: Monopoly rents are vulnerable to deregulation, and Chamberlainian rents fade as consumer tastes shift away from specific brands. Schumpeterian rents, which come from new innovations, are transient. They are mathematically destined to erode as followers imitate the breakthrough. Ricardian rent is the most durable of the four. It lasts because rivals simply cannot acquire an equivalent resource. If the resource is rare and hard to imitate, the competitive discipline of the market cannot erode the return. This explains why strategy focuses so heavily on isolating mechanisms, the protections that keep Ricardian differentials from being replicated. Viewed through Ricardo's lens, competitive strategy becomes a problem of optimizing resource heterogeneity and managing opportunity cost. The first mandate is to evaluate the firm's scope based on relative advantage. A firm should concentrate its best resources on the few activities where its relative advantage is greatest. Value is destroyed whenever first-rate managerial attention is spent on second-rate tasks, simply because the firm is good at them. The second mandate is to focus capital on acquiring and protecting resources that are genuinely scarce and inimitable. An advantage endures only as long as it cannot be reproduced. If a competitor can easily replicate a resource, the price differential collapses. Flawless operation on marginal assets yields only a baseline return. The true premium always goes to those who control the scarce peaks of the market. Ricardo proved that enduring market supremacy is not a product of how hard a firm works, but precisely which scarce, superior resources it controls.